Hello, everybody. This is Chris Albert with the Warrior Soul podcast, and it is my pleasure today to bring you Professor of Immuno-Toxicology, Rodney Dietert. Rodney Dietert. I'm sorry, Sarah, didn't mean to mispronounce your name. He's the author of an extremely fascinating book called The Human Superorganism. And this is really important for me and for a lot of people out there. I suffer from a disease called ulcerative colitis. And at various points in my existence, this disease has made my life a living hell. And it's also made a lot of other people's lives a living hell. And that's not the only autoimmune disease or chronic disease, non-communicable diseases, as Dr. Dietert's going to get into in this podcast. But there's a lot of these going around. It seems like everybody's coming down with one of these things these days. And in the veteran community, this is also important because one of the primary, I'd say, exacerbators of the symptoms is inflammation. And when we think about inflammation, we also think about the effect on the body and the brain. We've got 1 in 4 veterans suffering from diabetes in the VA system these days. We've got veterans suffering from heart disease, which is also caused by inflammation. High statistics of cancer. And of course, we're dealing with a lot of issues as far as post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. So first, Dr. Dietert, I want to welcome you to the podcast. Can I call you Rodney?
Just Rod is fine, Chris. Thank you very much.
Awesome, Rod. Thank you.
And can I start by, I know you have a number of veterans and active military as listeners, and I want to express my deep respect and deep appreciation for their prior and their current service. It's a real honor to be on a program where they may be listening.
Well, thank you so much, sir. And you were a military kid yourself, right?
Yes. Yes, I was born at Fort Lee, Virginia, just as my dad was finishing up his duty.
Awesome. Well, sir, let's get into this because, when you talk about something like the human superorganism, we all tend to think of ourselves as humans, and that classifies us as mammals, and we have bodies. But what else is there that affects our health? What is this thing called the human superorganism?
Well, we've known for a while, or at least some scientists back as early as in the 1960s were telling us, we're not sterile. We know we have infections, but we also have bacteria and other microorganisms that are really part of our day-to-day life. But that really didn't sink in until the 21st century. It's really only been about the last decade that we became aware that they're not simply just bystanders hanging out, but they've been there for millennia. They've been there from our earliest ancestors, playing a critical part in our life. And that if you actually start to count up numbers of cells in our body, numbers of genes in our body, they're the majority. They're a slight majority by number of cells. And over 99% of our genes are actually from the microbes. They're from bacteria, viruses, other things called archaea, fungi. And that's really stunning because those genes are doing things just like the genes on the human chromosomes. So we spent a lot of time thinking that the Human Genome Project and analysis of our genes and some corrective therapies were going to solve cancer and really set aside a lot of human misery in terms of disease. But the reality is that's the 1%. The 99% are on the microbes. And in a sense, that's good news for us because those 99% we can change probably easier than we can change the genes on our chromosomes as a whole.
That's absolutely fascinating. And it's crazy because I remember when everybody was talking about genes and I was competing in the bodybuilding world and everybody would talk about genetics and they had these crazy kinds of gene therapies that were coming around in addition to some of the chemical enhancements that were there. But now we're starting to understand that these microbes, they not only live on us and in us, they actually influence our own genetics and they influence our own genetic makeup. Is that correct?
Absolutely. It's a two-way street in terms of communication. So our immune system, for example, receives a lot, in our brain, receives a lot of signals from the microbes, but in turn, they will also communicate back. So it's bidirectional, but it starts at birth, and probably there's even some influences from the mother's placental microbes influencing as we develop in the uterus. But at birth is where the big seeding occurs, and we literally grow up with the microbes. And we need that for our immune system to distinguish what's safe and what's not safe. That's part of what helps prevent autoimmune diseases and what tells us what a real threat is in terms of pathogens. Our neurological systems need it, our gastrointestinal. And so we really can't function in a healthy way and in a way that separates and tells us what is really outside us and what's inside and what's safe and what's not safe. We just don't have a good frame of reference without growing up with those microbes. And so our ancestors practiced their way of life on a daily basis, had these as just a regular part of their growing up. And we were more agrarian. We prepared food locally. We grew up with animals. We, in some cases, farmed ourselves. Our ancestors were farming, or they were herding, or even nomadic. They were still getting exposed to the soil and to the animals. And that helped keep their microbiome robust and in good shape. And it turns out that the benefits of modern life and urbanization and the food revolution and antibiotics, while they saved countless lives, they had a downside we never realized, because all of those things actually tended to take away and erode the microbes that we need to be a part of us. So in a sense, we're not actually whole if we have our microbiome degraded or our microbiome destroyed. And the estimates are that, for example, in the US, we've lost about 35 to 40% of the diversity of our microbiome compared with, for example, the indigenous peoples in the Amazon. But they can lose it too. They can do it within 2 generations by moving to a suburb of Sao Paulo, starting to eat that diet, and then moving finally into the city. And within 2 generations, they can all of a sudden go from no cancer, no obesity to the same cancer rate and obesity rate that we see here.
Wow.
So it can happen very quickly. In our case, it's happened over time, and it's been very unintentional. Nobody was trying to do that. Everybody was trying to do something useful for food production, for nourishment, for the best we thought at the time. But in retrospect, it wasn't what we need. And so an opportunity now to begin to think about ourselves differently, think about ourselves more like being a walking coral reef or a mobile tropical rainforest, which in a sense, your ego goes down a little bit. You say, wow, it's not just me, the human, at the pinnacle of everything, but it's you, the representation of Earth's biota. You representing really a chunk of Earth's life. And you've got microbes in you that are really related to those that are at the bottom of the Marianas Trench and in the Dead Sea, in the Great Salt Lake, and under Antarctic glaciers and in the upper atmosphere, and in volcanoes and in geysers in Yellowstone. You've got relatives in your gut. And so in a sense, you're more awesome than you ever thought. But you're awesome in the sense that you cultivate that garden, that you intentionally realize what you are, and that you then feed and nourish and be a part of this connectivity and this wholeness in terms of us as something more than a mammal.
It's fascinating to me how far we got away from understanding that, and how far we went away from actually understanding that we're living, breathing animals. And to give you an example of this, when I was born in 1979, and I was in the generation of, I guess you could call them formula babies, yes, where mothers were actually being told not to breastfeed their children because the doctors were saying it was unhealthy and that it could lead to all sorts of different things. But we know now that that's not the case, and it's pretty much the opposite of what you really want to be doing, unless you have some sort of disorder that would prevent you from giving nourishing milk to the baby. Is that correct?
That's absolutely true. I mean, breast milk is really the standard. It's the normal standard, and it's tailored and designed. It's been honed over millennia to be exactly what we need. And that is not to say that formula can't be useful and may be necessary in some cases. But one of the things, for example, that breast milk has is a variety of different complex sugar molecules. And nutritionists have known for a long time that our mammalian cells, our human cells, can't digest those. They can't do anything with them. And they thought, well, it's just a throwaway. Why are they there? But, nature doesn't throw things away. They're there for intention. We just didn't understand it. So it turns out what they're there for is that they feed the microbes. There are specific microbes that need those sugars, that reproduce, that grow, that metabolize, that produce products, enzymes, and other metabolites that we need that come from breast milk sugars. So you're feeding the microbes as much as you're feeding the baby's mammalian cells. And it's a huge part of breast milk are these sugars, just for the microbes alone. In addition, breast milk transfers more microbes. It's a second seeding process. So the first seeding process is vaginal birth, where the baby actually becomes coated in, swallows, and acquires the mother's microbiome, and also bystanders. The father can have a role in that. But imagine that if you separate that, if you break that bond of seeding when the baby comes down the birth canal, and there's actually also some, it sounds gross, but there's some cecal mixing as well. So it's gut microbes are involved in addition to the vaginal microbes, and the baby gets all of that. And that's, in a sense, that's really the genetic contribution of the mother to the baby. It's more than the chromosomes. And it's the founding species the baby needs to start off life, then nurtured by breast milk. So they're maturing, they're changing, the bacterial species are shifting as breast milk comes into play, and breast milk changes in composition over the breastfeeding period as well. It's not, 1 month from the next. There are some subtle differences, and they are helping the immune system and the microbiome and the brain mature as well. And so it's the ideal when breastfeeding is possible. So diet matters early on, but also, as you might imagine, cesarean may be medically necessary, but we've seen a rise in elective cesarean because we thought it was, we didn't see any adverse outcomes with the baby short term. We didn't really know what to look for long term, like NCDs, type 1 diabetes, childhood obesity. But now we know those are elevated in elective cesarean delivered babies. So what happens is the baby not only doesn't get the microbiome seeding, but often, because it's a surgical procedure, the mother will have prophylactic antibiotics, which in turn also destroy her and the baby's, whatever the baby would get in terms of the microbiome, or damage that. And we now know that every round of antibiotics a child receives from birth to age 1 it elevates the risk of things like childhood asthma and obesity. Each one destroys part of the baby's microbiome that was not intended to be damaged. So my advice to physicians, to pediatricians, is it's not, don't use antibiotics if you have to, you have to, but put back that part of the baby that you didn't intend to destroy. In other words, put back the microbes the baby needs that were killed as a bystander to the pathogen. And so it has us begin to think about how you use antibiotics with complementary probiotic therapies, with ways to do exactly that, and ways to protect the baby's microbiome even as you're treating an infection that needs to be managed. So it's managing the whole baby, managing the mammalian part, but managing the microbes and managing it along development. And again, it begins with us realizing that sanitation and hygiene is important, but there is such a thing as over-sanitation. Sorry if I don't move around. If I don't exercise here, my lights go out. So keeps us moving, which is good. So those things become important, that it's not that you subject yourself to a life-threatening infection or present a high risk for that, but that in over sanitizing the house and not letting our kids play in soil and not letting our kids have exposure to animals early and not having the kind of things that our grandparents had, we are not allowing their microbiome to flourish like it should and could.
So we have all these things, and there's so much here. Between the antibacterial soap, the formula feeding, the massive amounts of C-sections that are being done today. I mean, there's my girlfriend is a nurse, and she's a post-operative nurse, and every day she has C-section after C-section after C-section come through, and it's almost to the point now where we're seeing more and more mothers elect to have them done or get pressured by doctors to have them done.
Yes.
And then we have the antibiotics being given out like Tic Tacs for every little thing. And they've been given out for so long. I guess the question is, what is going to be the result of this? And where are we headed? And just to give some examples at home, what types of diseases, problems can people be experiencing because of all of these, both environmental factors and actions that we're taking that are destroying our microbiomes?
Right. Well, in the book, I share sort of my personal story as well, because I'm in my 60s, and I had 30 years of a round of recurrent sinus infections that became bacterial, required antibiotics. And so I went 30 years with approximately 100 rounds of antibiotics over most of my adult life. I was never really well. I was either getting sick, on antibiotics, and even when you finish the round, you don't feel that great, really. And part of it is we didn't put the bacteria back. We didn't rebiose is what it's called, to restore your microbiome.
Doctors don't tell you to do that.
No, well, we didn't know. We didn't know. And it turned out what was causing this, I had some environmental allergies, but I had what's called gastrointestinal esophageal reflux disease, or GERD, which is an NCD, a non-communicable disease. And the acidification of my larynx and my sinuses and changing that environment subjected me then to, if not controlled immediately, to recurrent sinus infections. And so that was the missing piece that the specialists finally recognized. They still didn't have a solution for it, mind you, but recognized that that was precipitating this cycle that never ended for more than 30 years. Well, that led to all kinds of other issues, again, just because of this ongoing NCDs. Because once you have one, you're at a higher risk of others as well, with the inflammation being the link between them. So I finally was able to break that cycle, and I think the last 3 years I've only needed one round of antibiotics, and instead of 3 to 4 every year, one over 3 years. And what happened was I had to remove some dietary precipitating factors that I identified by accident. Actually, I wound up as a residential meeting that lasted 6 days in Germany, was eating local foods, and after the 5th day, my pants didn't fit. They were falling off me. I literally dropped a pant size because the abdominal inflammation went down.
And that was after how many days?
About 5 days, literally.
Oh, wow.
And I was eating and not exercising a lot. We were sitting around in meetings all day. It was a science conference, and literally, but getting out of gluten, U.S. food-filled gluten, and some dairy and some other things, and just eating. I was eating local Frankfurt, Germany food, and all of a sudden it changed things. And I realized a lot of what I was carrying around was actually abdominal inflammation.
What type of food was it? Was it like probiotic rich sauerkraut, or was there?
Well, some of that was there, but I had some breads, but they were hard rolls, and I'm absolutely convinced that the gluten content was different. And so we were eating diversified food, but it was all cooked in-house at this on a university campus, basically, and at an institute there, and it was all local sourced food. And so I got back and did some food elimination, But I realized also that I could recognize the minute the GERD started. And through the science literature and then doing something that sort of a three-step process, I asked, what are the good probiotics where there's a lot of research on them? And I identified those. And then I kind of did a TripAdvisor thing. It's like if you're going to stay in a hotel, you want to know if anybody had a good experience or not, or bad experience. So I started to look for personal experiences with the probiotics that had a lot of research behind them, and identified those that where people had actually used them and seen differences, and then tried them. And I was able to identify, and my wife is doing the same thing. We identified a group of 4, in this case, that will stop the GERD. So if I'm traveling and I get into gluten, or I get into, there's some nuts, if I overdo particular nuts, some things you can tell, but if you're on the road, you can get into food components that you don't realize. But I know the feeling in the stomach and the gut, and I can now control that with probiotics, and it never leads to the sinusitis, and I don't need the antibiotics. So I think it's just a personal story, but what it shows is here I am essentially now at retirement type age, and I can change my health situation. I wish I'd known 30 years earlier what to do, but I can do that by managing the microbiome, by ensuring that I am not getting depleted any more than where I might be. And we also essentially do evaluations of it, so we can tell what our microbiome profile is by having it analyzed, and then we can look at the effects of drugs, and we can look at rebiosing with the probiotics. So that became very important. And I think what it says is if I can do that in my older age, you can do it at any time and see some benefit. The earlier the better. Please help babies and children start out right and continue on that path. That's my request to everyone, that it can be empowered to do this kind of thing. But you can do it in old age, and it will help. And it's already helped myself and my wife tremendously. The other thing I want to mention is, again, with the best intentions. My title is Immuno-Toxicology. The second half of that is toxicology. And a lot of my career has been on determining how to test for safety of drugs and chemicals, particularly for the immune system. So the drugs and chemicals we use today are based on safety testing toxicologists have done to determine what's a safe level or what's a safe dose, with the best methods that were available. But I have to tell you, they did not include safety for the microbiome. They were based on the old model that we're the human mammal, and we've got to model what's safe for the human mammal. So think about that. Food additives, things in processed food, drugs,
Right. Things like
FDA-approved drugs.
Aspirin
Yes,
can completely
yes.
ruin it.
NSAIDs will, now again, a single dose. No, the dose matters. But if you have to take NSAIDs at a prolonged basis, they will change your microbiome. And in fact, people now that do the gut microbiome analysis of humans, they can go in and they can tell you whether you've been taking one type of NSAID or another type of NSAID, because the profile of damage differs. So then you take an NSAID, and you're at risk for gastric ulcers if you take those too long. But you've got good news, because you can take antacids, you can take proton pump inhibitors. But guess what? They damage a different part of the microbiome.
That's
not because anyone was doing anything wrong. It's just the best safety at the time didn't include testing if they damage bacteria, and they do.
Well, that's highly relevant for our audience, because one of the things, I mean, it's a joke in the military that, whatever you have wrong with you, they're going to give you Motrin.
Right.
I've taken Motrin so much during that time period, and there's so many guys out there that are taking it on a regular basis, and it's because you get beat up. You
do, and I'm not saying, again, I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not in any way giving medical advice. Keep that in mind. I'm talking about safety evaluation, and it's all what's the risk, what's the benefit. So I'm not saying I take NSAIDs if I've got a real problem, but I recognize that taking them more than over a day, I'm increasing. I'm probably going to start to kill things I don't want killed. So it's a matter, again, of frequency and dose. But it's just something, I mean, we thought these were the safest things in the world, and they're not. And it turns out that some drug companies that have been very diligent and have reported actually their surveys, internal surveys at scientific conferences, the results are that really a majority of the existing drugs that that particular manufacturer has on the market alter the microbiome.
What
And
about
that's not surprising because we never knew to test, you know. So we're gonna eventually we're gonna have safer drugs. We're gonna reduce side effects. We're gonna have more holistic strategies for
Mhm.
managing our health that are different. But we should know that the chemicals and drugs out there now have not been vetted because we never knew to do that. So I told my colleagues, toxicologists, I've said, I've got good news, bad news. The good news is we've got work ahead of us galore. We're never going to be out of work. Bad news is we don't know what's safe because
Well,
we didn't know to test the right way.
and I definitely want to get into that because it seems like you're in an interesting space in science right now, and I definitely want to talk about that potential paradigm shift. But when it comes to anti-inflammatories and some more holistic methods, are other like natural anti-inflammatories okay, like curcumin, or
Mm-hmm.
there's a product I used to take called phenocaine, and it
Mm-hmm.
had a strong curcumin in it. I used to take it for headaches.
Mm-hmm.
Are those a lot more beneficial or less harmful, I should say?
I think it depends. Again, it sort of be the supplement or the compound, and they each have their different toxicity and risk benefits, even for the mammalian end of things. But certainly those kind of things are going to come more into play. Absolutely. And it turns out there are going to be probiotics and microbes that themselves are anti-inflammatory, and particularly when you provide the bacteria and its food in the same supplement, then you get a double benefit because you're supporting the growth and the metabolism of that bacterium that has an anti-inflammatory property. So yes, again, my wife and I take supplements that are anti-inflammatory, and controlling inflammation is a big part of my day, and I think is going to be a useful strategy. And it won't just be NSAIDs. I mean, even things like omega-3 fatty acids. Those are anti-inflammatory in a different part of the pathway than some other drugs. So it's vitamin E and selenium have anti-inflammatory
Mhm.
components. They support enzymes that are helping to protect oxidation of our cells in different ways. So we're going to have kind of a broad spectrum approach, but a lot of it is going to be more natural and using other kinds of supplements and in the microbes in their food themselves as well.
So when we talk about different types of foods like gluten and
Mm-hmm.
sugar and some of the things that we normally think of as causing obesity and causing other negative health factors, they're not just adding fat around our waistlines, or the person is not just necessarily getting fat because of the energy balance, or it could still be because of the energy balance,
Mm-hmm.
but the gut microbiome is also exacerbating that. Is that how we should think of
Yeah,
it?
exactly. I give you one example, and there are not all of our microbes are equal in terms of their importance or significance. And the reason for that is some of them are duplicated, where if you got any one of 10 in sufficient numbers, you're good to go for those enzymes and those metabolites. They share a lot of functions, a lot of genes and a lot of functions. But there are some that are called keystone species, and these have unique functions. They're not duplicated, or there may only be one other bacterium that duplicates it. And so obviously, if those are killed, you lose a critical function. So one of the critical functions is in the tissues we call our mucosal tissues, our airways, our gut. Um, for example, those tissues, like the gut, they are really the difference between the outside of us and the inside. You realize that the part of our gut is really exposed to the environment,
Mhm.
through our mouth. It's actually part of the external environment. Inside of that is inside of us. So the lining, the barrier of the gut, and the protective layer called mucin. Mucin is really important because it keeps, it's like a good fence make good neighbors, it keeps some of the bacteria we don't want in direct contact with our mammalian cells, our gut lining, away. And so regulation of that, the mucin layer, is critical. And there is a bacteria called Akkermansia, is the genus name of it. And that bacteria, it actually digests mucin, but in doing that, it encourages our gut lining cells to make more. So it continues to be an active production of mucin process. When they're in place, they're getting fed, but they are signaling so that we're making more mucin, and we keep the right layer there, and it's good. If you damage those, you will get a path to obesity and metabolic syndrome. Right then and there. Some increased infection risk also, but right there, that's all you got to do. Well, guess what does that? Two of the most common things in processed foods that we call emulsifiers. So polysorbate 80 is one of them, and carboxymethylcellulose will selectively kill this Akkermansia bacteria and will compromise the gut lining so that you start to get bacteria in the gut that normally don't come in contact with the lining that do. And they stimulate the cells that I love to study, macrophages and inflammatory cells, and they think that the body's under a massive attack, start producing inflammation. That changes the fat tissue arrangement. And the macrophages, they're actually macrophages in fat tissue, they change to this pro-inflammatory state, and that causes what we call beige fat or brown adipose tissue. The adult version is beige. That causes it to become the white adipose tissue and to change its metabolic profile. And that is a way to get to obesity. It is not the only, don't get me wrong, it's not the only cause of obesity by any means, but that is an easy way to get there. And all you have to do is kill that one species of bacteria. So that species is pretty important. And we're now realizing that some of the food components and chemicals, cadmium will do that. Some of the heavy metals will kill Akkermansia. Wow. So it explains why they're called obesogenic toxicants, because they're actually, their toxicity to the mammalian system is almost secondary to what they're doing in the microbiome. And we're realizing that we need to know first what it does to the microbiome, because that's what sees it first. So if you drink arsenic, or you have water with some arsenic or lead, you're in Flint, Michigan, or were there, and we're drinking some higher lead levels. What's going to see it first? The gut microbes, your mouth microbes first, and then on down, right? So what actually happens for your body burden of lead or arsenic or cadmium or, Agent Orange. Okay, what happens first is what the microbes do with it. So they can be a good protector for us, or if it's damaged, allow things in even more readily. So we have different individual variation in our susceptibility to some of these things. To a single dose doesn't make arsenic safe. It just says single dose of arsenic, your risk. We now know, actually, we know which bacteria determine the risk for a given dose of arsenic based on how they metabolize it. Wow. So they're the first to see it. What they do with it actually determines the internal dose for your body, and the rest of the model that we've always used for safety comes after the microbiome. Wow. So we've actually advocated a complete turn it on its head way to do safety testing, where that has to come first. Same thing, if you breathe in, it's the microbes in our airways, our nose and our lungs. On your skin is just filled with microbes, and actually you have dry areas of skin, so there's desert loving microbes, and your armpits and some of the other areas that are moist, that's tropical rainforest microbes. They love dampness, and they're completely different. And those people that study the microbiome of the skin, they can tell what commercial products you're using by doing a map of your skin. They've done 3D mapping, and they can say, oh, you're using antiperspirants here, you're using various cosmetics, you're using sunblock. So again, sunblock has a benefit, but some has some detriment, and we need to really get to where we're reducing that kind of risk. And
Holy
so it's
smoke.
gonna, it's going to lead us to develop healthier products. But in the meantime, we need to be empowered to make some choices and to be careful and to understand what will support our microbiome.
And that's the thing. I think people need to realize that, your skin is not just something that covers your body. It's an organ that operates. Your digestive tract is not just a tube that runs from your mouth down to your butt and that you pass food through. I mean, there's a lot of really important things in your digestive tract. There's 75% of your immune system's located there. It's directly connected to the brain via the vagus nerve. That's some stuff to be concerned about, right?
Oh, absolutely. But it's a tremendous opportunity too, because, the gut's been called the second brain for
Mhm.
good reason. And it turns out there are more neuroactive chemicals, including neurotransmitters, that are made in the gut than are made in the brain, which to me is it's remarkable. Now, some of those are made by the gut lining cells that I've already talked about, but a large percentage of that that's made in the gut comes directly from the microbes. And different bacteria will make serotonin from the bacteria that make dopamine, from the bacteria that make GABA, that
Mhm.
make acetylcholine. So guess what? You can change your brain chemistry by changing your gut microbes.
That means you can end up depressed if it's not healthy. You can feel
Yes.
good if it is. That's
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
amazing.
And in fact, we now know that this controls mood, controls behavior, anxiety, controls food cravings. So, for example, I grew up in San Antonio was born in Virginia, but grew up in San Antonio in the 50s. I was probably getting a lot of Mexican food, but also fried chicken back in Texas in the 50s. And so I cultivated my garden of gut microbes that wanted fried chicken. They used that as their energy source.
Mhm.
Now I've been told I really should eat kale. I really want, I should eat kale. But my microbes grew up on fried chicken and they don't want kale. And they actually, uh, those microbes know how to put a hurt on your body in terms of not getting their energy supply. So if you all of a sudden been eating pasta for a while and you want to change your diet, good luck,
Yeah.
because it's not just choice. People think that it's not, their willpower isn't enough or something. No, the microbes are actually making you hurt and changing, making it doubly difficult for you to change your diet because they're calling for the energy source that they've been using. And they're in predominance. You've cultivated them and they now control the chemistry in your brain. And if you don't continue to eat that, you're going to not feel so good. You're going to notice the difference subtly. You won't be aware of what's doing it, but it's like, wow, no, I really do crave pasta. Well, yeah. So what I've advocated is change your diet and your microbes at the same time. Install the microbes. So I need to put in microbes that want kale as I'm trying to eat kale, and I've got a better shot at that dietary shift being smooth, easier, and successful. And so. Um, but the other thing is knowing which of these bacteria make serotonin, which make dopamine, which you can now, and people have shown there's good now even human studies that are showing you don't need hardcore antidepressant drugs, which are one of the most prescribed that we have actually. Sleep meds and anxiety depression meds are
Mhm.
some of the most prescribed drugs in the U.S.
And they're
You
amazingly
don't, yeah,
ineffective,
yeah, and
especially
they
in
have
the
side
veteran
effects, and
population.
you will not need those in the future
Mhm.
because literally it's changing your ratio, your balance of microbes. So it's not even putting anything in that's foreign to you. It's simply boosting up something that's underrepresented in your gut microbiome that needs to come to the forefront, and you can change your mood. And they've done that. They've shown you can reduce stress, you can reduce anxiety, you can turn on a dime in terms of mood when you do that, when you get the metabolic benefit of the differential gut microbes. So that's really going to be the future. And it's the whole new area of science is called psychobiotics. And there are going to be books coming out on that very shortly. You'll see a book from some of the experts on that. That's really wonderful as well. They've done terrific research, and that's the future of help. And I myself have some PTSD
Mhm.
from a prior life trauma. I can tell you that, so I'm concerned with anxiety and sleep and all of those issues, and managing that, and the managing the gut microbes and the food that they want is an important part of managing mood, behavior, food cravings, and things like that.
So for the guys at home who are potentially dealing with depression, potentially dealing with PTS, or even potentially dealing with traumatic brain injury and the resultant symptoms, as they're healing themselves, as they're trying to go through therapy, as they're trying to get their life together, one of the things they should really be focusing on is really improving that gut microbiome, and it can make a world of difference as to whether or not the treatments are actually going to be effective for them, right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And part of that is having, ideally, where you have a physician who's there are going to be training programs on this certification, but have a physician who's open to this, who realizes, and our nutrition or dietitian who's open to this, and is going to be working both ends of it, and not just saying, "Oh, go eat this diet" or something like that. Because again, the cold turkey dietary changes can be very, very challenging. But rather, we'll be working with trying to help the rebiosis as well with the microbiome, and again, you'll see that with the reduction in inflammation, the changes physiologically that all go with that. One of the things I could mention is there are studies now that show that exercise, for example, a good, healthy amount of exercise actually is useful for the microbiome. I mean, it helps it to be more robust, to be more diversified. On the other hand, and they've done this using laboratory animals, so, mice on treadmills and things like that. If you make them run when they don't want to run, or make them run longer than they want to run, it damages the microbiome.
Oh, wow.
A
Oh,
stress
wow.
effect, right? A severe,
Yeah.
a major stress effect.
I've heard
So
of
keep in mind,
triathletes
yeah.
having horrible guts,
Yeah, horrible
horrible.
guts, exactly. And now there's a way to balance, to get into a homeostasis, by first of all, recognize what's exercise that you can tolerate, but ensure that, boy, if you're damaging the gut in the process of going to a high level of exercise, then repair that, restore that. That's really no different than taking antibiotics in terms of the effect on your microbiome.
That's yeah, wow. That's crazy. And there's a lot of guys who probably listen to this who probably push a lot
Sure, absolutely.
run.
And there's now hope to really be able to hit a comfort zone and a wellness zone where and again, my wife and I do some of the analyses so we can keep track of the microbiome profile. And we can see, for example, my wife was once prescribed a drug that was supposed to be very limited in its effect, very targeted, and it completely obliterated her gut microbiome, and she had to rebiose, and it took her 9 months to
Wow.
get it back to where it had been before the drug.
Mhm.
So we use that just as a way to track how are we doing, and we can measure. I think that's going to come into the future. You get, your physician does an annual checkup, and you get blood pressure, and you may even have blood chemistry or blood profile analysis, done. You're going to have annual microbiome uh, profiles as just a matter of your record.
Let me ask you this, because I've been consistently told by my doctors that my lifestyle decisions are not going to have an effect on my ulcerative colitis. Over and over and over again, they say the only thing that's going to have an effect is the medication. And I know I'm not the only one who's being told this. Why are doctors so resistant to this? Is it because of a lack of education? Is it because of, I mean, my deepest, darkest of thoughts, I think there's a conspiracy theory out there that maybe some of the pharmaceutical companies are threatened. But why, in your opinion, is there any resistance to understanding this at all?
I think that physicians do the best within the framework of their box, and they're certainly trying to help patients as they know best. Some of them have been reading more, or have, again, they don't have a lot of time, so part of it is the information that's being delivered, and so they're not necessarily the first line exposed to some of the latest microbiome research if they haven't had time, and the drug companies are not providing that. The good news is the drug companies, you might think, for example, that my message would not be well received at FDA and pharmaceuticals, but in fact, I gave a book talk at the FDA in the drug evaluation sector of the FDA last summer, and have also talked at a number of pharmaceutical conferences and are on some advisory boards there, because that's the future. I mean, I don't begrudge drug companies making money. I want their drugs to be useful and safe. And that means safe for the microbiome, and it means the future drugs are going to work with and through the microbiome. They are absolutely going to be microbiome centric, if nothing else, maybe more so than mammalian centric. So that's my message to them. And it's like, if you want to make money in the future and you want to still be there, you will be operating this way, because that's human biology. It's not, it's not a fad. It's what we are. So, and it's what your drugs hit first. So I think the message hasn't filtered down to physicians is essentially what I'm getting at in a major way. But I can tell you that my physician actually just retired. I've just had to shift my primary physician. But in the last 2 years, and while I was working on this book, and after I had the dietary change, I lost weight. All of a sudden, wasn't having the sinusitis, recurrent infections. I didn't need antibiotics. And he was asking, said, I tell people to lose weight. They never do it. You did it. What did you do? And I said, that's because I changed my diet and I changed my microbiome. And he said, well, I want to read the papers.
Wow.
And to his credit, he did.
That's awesome.
He did. And so my hope is he'll pass that on now as a retired physician, but the GP. And so it's simply a matter of finding the GPs that are doing that, finding the specialists that are doing that. Obviously, the specialist who was treating my ear, throat, nose and diagnosed the GERD is, again, open to these kind of things, because he knew what was going on, but still the solution outside of traditional allopathic medicine wasn't really there. And so I think you're going to see more physicians doing it. It may be a matter of finding those that are open to it. They're integrated medicine people, doctors of osteopathic doctors. Again, there are a variety of physicians that have different experiences and include different aspects. And I think you're going to find that more and more they're incorporating this, but also as the drug companies are educating on the microbiome. And again, there is real hope there, but that, it takes time for those kind of things to filter down, where they're actually selling products and the people that are meeting with the physicians are actually have a microbiome-based product to sell. So that's going to take a while.
As consumers, when we're looking for, say, a probiotic supplement or something to help our gut microbiome, what types of things should we be looking for? Because you walk into the health food store and you see shelves and shelves of these things now. Are there specific types of things we should look for on the label?
Well, unfortunately, it's kind of the wild, wild west. So that, you just because something could be sold doesn't mean that that's going to be useful for you. You could be wasting money. You may not know the quality of what's in there. And so I think that again, I'm not prescriptive in my book because I don't believe one size fits all. I think there are several variations on healthy microbiomes, and but there is information coming out that's medically based, again, where there's good research behind it. And I provided resources to links that are updated regularly. The International Scientific Association of Probiotics and Prebiotics, that's really government, academia, industry infused, and is a wonderful, up-to-date organization. And so their website really has good quality information, both on the papers, but also on products that are out there. There are going to be books that MDs are putting out. Again, I'm not prescribing, but they will talk about things and practices that I think are effective. And in my case, I used what we did was to go to the literature and identify those that were really in the forefront that had a lot of research on them. Again, had been tested for what they did, for example, among college students with stress, coming in through semester exams and things like that, which ones were used over in Africa to reduce heavy metal toxicity. And you could protect against environmental hazards in some cases by having a healthy microbiome. Those kind of studies then looking for the products and looking for whether other people had benefited. And then in the end, it's got to work in your own body. If after taking it for a while, you can't notice a difference, don't waste your money. You know, it's got to, now there is one that's a really great probiotic. My wife and I tried it. Could be we didn't try it long enough or in the right circumstances, but that particular one didn't seem to work for us. It was kind of expensive. So it's not among the ones that we go to, but I recognize that it helps a lot of people. So again, in the end, it's got to work for you, or don't waste the money. But there are some things, there's even some on, and again, in regular chain drugstores, there's a product, and I don't want to mention individual products, but there's one that will be touted in MD-based books that is pretty routine. You can pick it up in any city, any drugstore, and it's pretty good. It's among the 4 that we use. It's not the best. It's not the critical one among the 4 that we use, but it is. If I'm on the road and I can't get anything else, I'm loading up on that, and I can get it the nearest drugstore. So people are going to have them available. The other thing is, look at some of the fermented foods that your ancestors used to eat.
Right.
If your grandfather, like my case, my grandfather ate sauerkraut, right? Came over to Texas in the 1850s from Germany. He was the millers were their trade. And my grandfather ate sauerkraut. My father ate it as a kid, not as an adult, because my mother really didn't have a history cooking it or having it in the family. I really didn't get to eat it early on. Other people have kimchi, they may have kombucha. Again, whatever it is, it's a chance to try it out again and see how that does. Because those, if they're refrigerated, if they have live cultures, again, that's a natural food source that supported our ancestors and can help your microbiome as well. So there are food-based, culture-based, different yogurts with natural products. There's an old, again, there are beverages in Japan that go back to the 1930s that have active cultures in them and have helped some populations quite a bit. And again, are on the list, you'll see some of the MDs putting out. So I apologize about not wanting to mention a specific product, but
that's completely
it's never,
fine. Yeah.
it's never, because it might not work for an individual.
No.
And but I think there's going to be an ever increasing line of products, and there are going to be companies that are providing not just the bacterium, but the food source along with it. So it's a whole product, and they're going to, the trials will be there as well to tell you exactly what they're doing. And as you get your microbiome analyzed, which the cost is coming down, and there are more people doing it, and more data. Again, as you have more data, the companies, the quality of what they provide you with for information is better. And it's going to be a matter that you can look in there and see, I need this. This is what I need. This is where I can get this. Awesome. And then in the end, see if it doesn't change your metabolism and how you feel. That's the key. It's got to be your body. And as you know, a physician, the best drug in the world that a physician says should work, unless it works for you, that's not precision medicine. It wasn't precise for you. One of the examples I can give, again, on the safety end is, I mentioned in the book, digoxin, a long time heart medication that's helped a large number of patients. Digoxin has a narrow efficacy range, or a narrow range where it's effective. Above that, it's toxic and it can kill people. Below that, it's ineffective. But it turns out whether it works or not is dependent upon one specific species of gut bacteria and the amount you have. So guess what? A physician could prescribe it at the dose recommended for humans for effectiveness and being safe, and it could kill you because your level is different. Or it could not work in you because you have a different level, or it could work. But now we know the bacterium, so the physicians can take digoxin, they could know your microbiome profile, and they're going to say, I'm going to give you a week's worth of this bacterium before I give you digoxin.
Got it.
Or I'm going to change the dosage of digoxin. They need to do that on every med, quite frankly, because, really, that's where it's going to head. So that'll be real precision medicine. Real personalized medicine is working to match even pharmaceutical allopathic meds with your microbiome. And if need be, adjust your microbiome so they work. Cancer drugs only work through the microbiome. And recent survey in the UK said, cyclophosphamide and drugs like that, they work in half the patients, not in the other half the patients. You could make them work in virtually everybody by adjusting the microbiome.
Wow. I want to ask you, and this is going to be my last question, but around 10 years ago, I was in a PhD program and I read a book called The Origins of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn.
Mm-hmm.
And you seem to be in this really cool space in the timeline of your career where, 30 years ago, you weren't talking about this at all. You were talking about other things, but there was kind of this glimmer of light that happened for you. And now it seems like it's completely changing everything. How is that for you as a scientist? And has this been scary at times? Has it been life-changing for you? Describe that for me.
Yeah, it has been life-changing, and in surprising ways. So I did work on the immune system and on safety for the immune system all my career, and got into working on how non-communicable diseases are more similar than we used to think, are really connected, and with inflammation at the root of them, or miscontrolled inflammation. So all that was part of kind of every year progressing along that line. But what was amazing was I never worked on the microbiome, never really worked on infectious agents, or even though I worked on the immune system. But all of my work on the microbiome, this book, my papers, I've appeared in a documentary movie, the whole change in my career happened strictly because of having an opportunity to write a paper where I got stuck. And the paper was to identify the one thing you could measure in a newborn baby that would best predict whether that baby's life was filled with health or filled with disease. And I thought I had the answer that was vested in the developing immune system and my whole life's work, but I couldn't get past the second paragraph. It was terrible. I couldn't write the thing. I was stuck. And I woke up in the middle of the night from a dream. And I don't even remember the details of a dream, but it was really vivid. It was like, wow, I've been dreaming. Wow, do I have this idea, a big picture idea. And the idea was the baby needs to be self-completed at birth. And I called it the completed self hypothesis, that the best thing you could measure was the extent to which that baby was completed with a robust, diversified microbiome. That was the signal.
Wow.
Things change. You eat different diets, you're exposed to different chemicals, you have a different life. They all affect your health. But the one thing you could measure that would be the best predictor then is microbiome completeness with a diversified microbiome. So I wrote a paper, and it was in kind of a physics-oriented journal. Actually, I thought nobody'd see it, but 2 UK filmmakers saw it. They made a documentary movie where this was one of the main themes. It led to more lectures and invitations, more papers. I actually met another microbiome researcher who became a microbiome researcher because he had a dream, amazing dream that he had published. So I thought, oh, I'm such a wimp. I should have the courage to publish that this was just from a dream. It was nothing about my career, nothing I was trained to do, nothing I ever thought I'd be doing, just gut instincts from a dream, right? Wow. So I wrote a paper, and I also wrote, I wrote more the state of things, and that this was actually a malleable birth defect kind of thing. It was like a birth defect if you don't have your microbiome installed, but it can be restored. It can be changed. We can do something about it. And that paper won the Best Paper of the Year award from the Teratology Society, a scientific group I was not even in at the time. I was not a member of. So I'm like, wow. So everything just has magically sort of opened up by essentially trusting my dream.
Wow, that's
trusting
amazing.
My gut instincts.
Yeah, we've had
and not going with my
that.
career, not going linearly.
Yeah.
And after that, I actually teach creative problem solving to Cornell students, to undergraduates, teaching them how to think linearly, but also how to use every other tool you could imagine to problem solve, to really get themselves a different way of perceiving things, be a different observer. And so I've planned none of this. This was all unfolding. It still does. There are days where I sit here and say, I'm not sure what I'll be doing next. I guess I'll wait till something shows up. And it's almost better to operate that way than to plan the next 5 years. So I don't, yeah, but you have to trust. You have to get to where, so for me, it's been amazing. It's been magical. And it is, it's nothing I could have planned.
That's, we hear so much about a lot of people turning to dimethyltryptamine and psychedelics and things like that to get to similar states. And I think it's always amazing when somebody can do something that just came to them from instinct, and it can have such a huge impact and lead to such inroads in their lives. And I've had similar experiences myself, and that's kind of why I'm on the path I am. So that's an amazing story, sir. That's awesome. I'm going to let you go, but I want to tell everybody about your book, The Human Superorganism. I read this on a flight in a single sitting, and it is absolutely fascinating. It's an amazing piece of work, and everything about it was interesting to me. And I rarely read books from cover to cover. I'll usually read the intro. I do the old social scientist thing where I'll read the introduction and things like that. This I read from cover to cover, and it enthralled me. It was fascinating, and it taught me so much about the human body, about my own experience as somebody who's suffering from some of these non-communicable diseases. And I think in it, there's also a glimmer of hope for a lot of you out there who might be suffering from non-communicable diseases, who might be suffering from some neurological issues due to post-traumatic stress, depression, or traumatic brain injury. And I definitely highly recommend the book. And we're going to have a link to it up on the show notes for this show. Dr. Dietert, Rod, is there anything else you'd like to get out to our audience before we go?
No, first of all, thank you so much for telling them about the book. I mean, some people have indicated that they just don't think about themselves quite the same after they read it. And to me, that's the best news possible. And so I appreciate your kind comments. And, my goal is just to try to do something useful and to try and provide information so that people can be empowered. And I think that's the thing. If I can change in my 60s and all of a sudden not need meds that were actually, had a downside and were also making me unhealthy, even as they were resolving infections, then other people can see benefits too, and they can do it through combinations of things. But they really become empowered. It really is a matter of managing your own body and managing it differently, managing like the coral reef. We know how to protect a coral reef better than we used to. We also now know how you can help your own body better than we used to as well. And Chris, I thank you so much for the chance to be on the show. Thank you for reading the book and the kind words. And again, I am so grateful to your audience, those people who are veterans and those who are serving now. And I appreciate and give gratitude to you every day.
Awesome. Well, thank you, sir. And thank you for everything you do. And to everybody else out there, I hope you got a lot out of this episode. Again, I highly recommend the book. And now what I want you to do is to get out there, take action, and make sure that you're living your best life.